Welcome to More Able Than Dis, the podcast where we discuss everything related to disability and music education. More Able Than Dis is sponsored by the Music Department at Georgia College and State University, Georgia's designated public liberal arts university. Today we'll be talking about musicianship with cerebral palsy with our special guest, Dr. Bonnie Von Hoff. Dr. Bonnie Von Hoff is the first in a set of triplets and was injured at birth, resulting in a condition known as cerebral palsy. Dr. Von Hoff is also an experienced voice teacher and presenter. She and I presented workshops in 2019 on issues related to faculty members with disability in higher education at the National Opera Association Annual Conference in Salt Lake City and at the Diversity in Organizations, Communities, and Nations Conference in Patras, Greece. As a former member of the voice faculty at Georgia College, she has taught applied voice and other related courses, including music appreciation. She holds a Doctorate of Arts degree in voice with a secondary in music education from Ball State University, a Master's of Music degree from Manhattan School of Music, a Certificate of Performance from Northwestern University, and a Bachelor in Arts in Music from the University of Northern Colorado. All right, Dr. Von Hoff, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
I am well. So do you have anything that you just really want to say to start us off to make sure it gets said?
Well, I'm just happy to be here to share my experiences. So feel free to ask me any questions you'd like to.
All right. Well, let's start by talking about how having cerebral palsy impacted your K-12 music education.
Okay. Well, my K-12 music education was really more standard. I went to an elementary school, Berkeley, that had physical therapy and occupational therapy. But music, I did just with my mainstream class, and I very much enjoyed it. I was kind of loud, but as I remember music, I just did what the other people were doing, singing, playing instruments. I mean, there were certain instruments that were more difficult to play than others, but I was able to go right along with my class, which was nice.
That is nice.
And I really enjoyed that. Yeah. And then in middle school and high school, I discovered choir, which was great. I was in choir in middle school, and of course in high school I was in a choir called Girls 21, which was a wonderful, wonderful experience. Fantastic director. The thing I remember most is just having to stand on the floor because balancing on the risers was too much for me to try to do. So the director was great about it, and I can remember doing that, but having a difficult time making it through the concert standing up. You know, I'm trying to keep my balance and stand, but I'm getting tired, but I don't want to say anything because, you know, I just want to do the concert. But that's what I remember. But I have better memories of just being able to sing and be in my section. It was like music was like an equalizer in a lot of ways for me. So
I remember in the chapter you added for my book, you talked about having trouble making All-State because you had trouble processing the sight reading.
Yes. Yeah, my oral recall was always pretty strong, but my sight reading just never was. And, you know, as long as you've got the piano, you know, I could kind of and follow along, but, you know, ask me to sight read a cappella, and I'm like, yeah. So, you know, unfortunately for me, All-State did not work out because of my sight reading, my technical musicianship. But, you know, that's okay. I went on to have a lot of great experiences. So, yes, you know, sight reading is sight reading, one of those things.
And a heck of a resume in terms of schools that you studied at. Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah, I
Thank you.
noticed that since my injury, I have trouble reading both like
Mhm.
words and music.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
especially whenever there are other things going on or any kind of pressure.
Right. Yeah, like pressure, or if there's like multiple staffs, and then
Yeah.
you have to read like the second staff or the third staff.
Uh-huh.
A lot of times when I would do opera or choir, or if I had a solo in a certain movement or something, I would highlight my line,
So you
which
could
was
read
great.
yellow and
Yeah,
then yeah.
what? Yeah, which was great, except for when I got on off on the wrong line. I highlighted the wrong line on the next page. But
Sure.
that's what practice is for, and you just keep trying to do different things.
Yeah, and I find that, if I have time to work on it, I can be functional. But there are times, especially in rehearsal, where I just sit and I can't even read the music fast enough to read it while they're playing it.
I understand. I totally understand. I would remember sitting in rehearsals and I would just try to pick up as much as I could,
Mhm.
and praying that they would play it again so
Yeah.
that I could hear the part again. So that usually worked out, because in choral settings, oftentimes parts will be individually played and replayed
Yeah.
and such. So
Okay, and so kind of building off of that and jumping to college, I remember that when we presented for the National Opera Association, you talked about not getting some of the roles because they were worried that you might fall, like
yeah, well, I'm sorry, go ahead.
in opera productions.
Right. There were certain um, roles that were not right for me because of different staging and different things that were required, different parts of the stage and different things that a character might have to do that I was not able to do. But on the flip side of that, there were roles that I was able to do very well, that I would get cast in things you could use a cane in, like Principessa from Suor Angelica. I would get that a lot. I'd get that one. Or I would get the grandmother in the lullaby. I did that as an undergraduate from the console, the lullaby, as my own little opera scene, which was fun. Um, and the thing that I remember from college times, there was a summer that I went to a young artists program in Connecticut, and the director of my opera was in Dido and Aeneas as the sorceress. And
Uh-huh.
she and I met in the mornings before rehearsal, and she choreographed this great routine for me to do with a cane, which
Oh,
was really, really cool. And Manhattan School and Northwestern were really very much the same way, as was Ball State. I did roles like Rebecca Nurse in the Crucible at Northwestern, and then in opera scenes, I was in the opera scenes program at Manhattan. And at Ball State, I did the medium
mm-hmm.
as Baba, which these are all terrific roles and
Yeah,
all great roles to do with a cane. So, it's such a hard issue because we want everyone to be comfortable and able to do things. And I think the most frustrating thing about disability is the immediate limitation.
sure.
But just because you can't do one thing doesn't mean that you can't do other things. So, and everybody has that to some degree, I think. Some things you do and some things you don't do.
So was the choreography that you talked about with the cane, was that part of the role, or did they creatively add a cane to that choreography so that you could do the role?
It was creatively added, which I
Outs-
truly appreciated. We did, it was fantastic. I can remember, doing things like holding the cane up over my head and, casting things. And yeah, can you picture this? Yeah. But
Wonderful.
but it was so much fun, and of course, movement helps with memory too. So it's easy to memorize the different parts and things.
Well, and you have such a beautiful voice. It would be a shame for
Thank
them
you.
to not cast your voice because of something that could be, handled by making it a
Yeah.
seated role or even
Uh-huh.
a kind of still role.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
No. I thank you.
I think I remember also at the opera, when we were at the Opera Association convention, somebody talked about having a blind singer who wanted to do
Yes.
it was
Uh-huh.
a Mozart role, help me.
Yeah.
The Queen of the
It
Night.
was. I think so. And it was Gordon Ostrowski, who I I just really love Gordon. He was my opera director at Manhattan School. He was the opera studio director, and he was really wonderful. We did. all kinds of things. I did opera outreach and the different opera scenes, and it was really a wonderful experience. He did mention, was it? I think it was Queen of the Night, but my memory is not as good as it used to be, so that's going to be my guess. So
Yeah, no, I think it was because they put a complete like face covering on her to kind of dramatize the role, and then they had her handmaiden lead her out, and so they kind of played into her blindness because they used it and then staged it in such a way that the blindness was just part of the character. And they were able to, like I just said, with you, they were able to take advantage of a beautiful voice that was suited to that role with, even with the blindness. And, some people say, despite, but I don't think that as a disabled person, I don't think that I work despite my injury. I think I work with my injury.
Exactly, Tina. I absolutely agree with you on that, because it's not a despite thing. It's something that you can work with. And when we all do that, allow, like you said, play into the disability, that uses it to its greatest advantage. Sometimes it can be an advantage, just depending, I mean, because of my experiences, I know exactly how to use a cane. There's not any practice time needed, but, doing things like creative staging, using disabilities to a character's advantage adds a new depth and an authenticity that just becomes part of what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And I love the fact that you had good experiences with music teachers all the way through your music education.
Thank you. Yeah. I was very fortunate. Very fortunate.
So, and you were choral the whole way, yeah?
I was choral, and of course I did some opera scenes and things through school, but choral and kind of more directed towards like concert work, like things like oratorios and things.
Mm-hmm. Have you noticed that as a professional singer, after you got through, actually in college or as a professional singer, have you noticed that your peers treat you any particular way, like when you're singing or when you're in the opera company?
Any particular way, as much as being aware of what the disability is, and then I would kind of just make sure, okay, if I need to stage this way, maybe we can do this way. Or if I need to go on this angle, maybe I can try this. And I think that's part of it too. Directors and teachers, of course, need to help students adapt, but then we as students or persons who are participating need to also use our skills to say, hey, this is what I could try here. What do you think of this? Collaborate a little bit. But mostly, in terms of if I had a role, if I got a role, or if I was doing a solo, directors would always make sure I was comfortable. Like I sang for a while here with a group called Voices, the Chapel Hill Chorus, and they are a wonderful choir, very inclusive, and I've done a couple solos within pieces with them, like in Ceremony of Carols, and the director's great. He just wanted to make sure I was comfortable, and he allows me to sit for performances, and which is really great. Wish I would have asked about that back in high school, but I think, as young people, we just want to fit in. So
we do, yeah, and we're scared that if we ask, they're not going to want to deal with us.
Right, exactly, yeah, and that's just, I think it's a teen thing. We all have things that we're worried about, and when you're a teen, it's a huge focus.
So, would you say that there were things that a teacher might, if they had been paying attention, might have noticed that you were getting uncomfortable and might have, seen that you might need a chair? Or is there something
things like that?
Yeah, our teachers could look for?
Right, and I think yes, and I think the part of this issue is not that. I think my director, she would have, if I had just said, can I have a chair?
Yeah.
She absolutely would have let me have it. But, there's two sides to it. Sometimes people don't know if they should ask. If I do ask, Is this person going to be uncomfortable? Does this person want to try to make it through the concert? So it's kind of a balance between persons with disabilities stating what we need and directors being aware and having that come together. But on the other side of that as well, I feel that teachers should not be afraid to ask. It's okay to ask. It's absolutely okay. And in my experience, if anything, when you ask, it just would always show me that they're aware, that the teacher's aware, and they just want you to be comfortable, and that they see you, which is a hugely important thing, being seen.
Would you prefer to be asked outside of like the general rehearsal, like taken aside, like after a rehearsal, or rather than, hey, you need to sit down, you know?
That's a good question. I think maybe just a gentle word before or after rehearsal, probably best, because that way you can just blend it in instead of kind of, singling out the person, saying, "Hey, you look like you're kind of tearing there." Not that anybody would say that, but you know what I mean. And I would just laugh. But if you maybe just want to just take a minute as a student is coming into class or leaving, just say, "Hey, you know what? Do you need a chair? You can have one if you like." That's all that needs to be said, and and each student is so different.
Yes. That's
the challenge. And I think the important thing is getting to know where the student's strengths are and where their abilities are, and playing into those in order to help them as well. Sure. And just letting the student know that you're a person that they can come to.
So along those lines, were you the only student who was not standing on the risers, or?
Yes, as I remember, yes. And so the way that we did it was I would just kind of stand at the edge of the riser on the floor. I wore
audience.
Yeah, like as they would come in, I would be with my section, but I would be again on the towards the end of the riser on the floor, so that it wasn't so like I wasn't like in the middle by myself or anything. I was just on the side. And I remember wearing flats, as I remember in the women's choir, they wore heels. But yeah, no, that wasn't going to happen for me. So I just wore flats, and that was fine. And again, wish I would have asked for that chair because it was a little bit long to stand. But now I have a chair so when I need to sit down. So that's good.
Sure. That's wonderful. Yeah, because I'm thinking about our listeners who are teachers and who really want to do the best they can for their students. These are great ideas, because right now, for you, we didn't have any musical adaptations, although that, perhaps the sing-along track was very useful to you since the audiation
because it was always easier for me with audio. And I think that also once a teacher can recognize a student's mode of learning, that can also help too. Because if you know that the student has a strength, kinesthetic or audio or visual, then you can use that as well.
Well, and there are a lot of able musicians who learn their choral music using the practice tracks as well.
Oh, of course. Yes.
Yes. That's not necessarily something that our choral teachers need to do extra for you. That's just something that you get extra out of their normal routine.
Exactly. So again, it's this balance of using what's available to you and then creating that relationship where either the teacher feels like they can speak with the student or the student feels like they can speak with the teacher. Sure. And, we live in such a exciting time where more inclusivity is happening, certainly than when we were growing up.
Yeah.
Which I think, everybody does the best. We all do the best we can. It's just that now with new modes of testing and everything, we're starting to understand more and more about different disabilities and how they work and how to work with them.
Yes. So sorry, on another note, and I know that you're all so positive you'll probably never say anything bad at all, but have you ever had a time where other musicians or students were upset or threatened or in any way uncomfortable with your presence as a musician?
Oh gosh, looking back on different things I've been a part of, I think sure, to some degree. This is a new idea, a different idea. And I think sometimes when people get uncomfortable, it happens because they don't know what to do.
Yes.
But, at the same time, it's kind of this uncomfortability feeding off of each other. If I know that somebody's uncomfortable, I'm going to be like, man, what do I do? Okay, what can I do to make this person comfortable? But then also I have to realize I can't change how somebody feels. I can't change somebody's assumptions. And so all I can do is just do the best that I can and show what I have and let that stand for itself. But yes, I mean, yeah, there were times where, I would be in different learning situations and different music situations, and I knew that people were uncomfortable or assumptive, or at least it certainly felt that way.
Okay.
And it's just one of these things that it does happen to everybody on some degree. But the thing about disability is how it manifests itself. It's something, especially like with physical disability like cerebral palsy, you can see it. It's right there. And so it's kind of this, there's not very many of us in comparison.
Sure.
So when you see it, it's kind of this, how did that happen? That can happen sometimes, but again, I think it again comes from people being not as comfortable, and if hopefully we can make them more comfortable so that tension is not there.
You're so sweet, because I completely mess with people. I had recently somebody was watching me type, and they said, "Why do you type with your right hand?" And I looked them straight in the eye and I said, "Because that's the one that works." And they were like, "Oh," and I was like, "Don't ask it if you don't want to know."
No. Good for you. Wow. That's, yeah, I mean, I get that though. I mean, because sometimes you got to make light of certain situations, and I think, the way that you handle that, kind of let them know, yeah, this is, and it shows that you're comfortable with yourself too,
Well, I mean, it's not going to get better if I'm uncomfortable. So I'm just a terrible person. So I just like to make,
no.
It's fun for me. So I just,
Yeah, I understand. I do, because sometimes you just have to, it just makes you wonder sometimes with people when they,
like you said, they've just never seen it before. They've never been in a position like that. And yeah, again, I'm a terrible person because I should just give them the experience and not mess with them, but I can't do it.
Well, what did the person say? How did the person react?
Just gaping. "Oh, I'm so sorry," and that always makes me laugh too, because they didn't for me, But I was typing, minding my business, so
Sure. Yeah. And sometimes people just want to know.
And they just don't know. And I usually encourage people to ask, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to mess with you.
Yeah. No. Fair enough.
So, does your cerebral palsy affect your voice at all?
No, it doesn't. And I'm very thankful for that, because I know that CP can. And no, I don't have any issues with vocal production.
Very good. Yeah. So is it mostly the standing thing?
Yes, it's the standing and the balance thing. You know me, balance is not my favorite activity. But I got to keep working at it. And the difficulty in singing is that you have so much that you're already thinking about, as you know from playing. You've got to think about the music and the phrasing and all the logistics. And I can remember giving recitals and things. I would always try to kind of creatively figure out, how can I clutch onto the piano without looking like I'm just hanging on for dear life? Because it wasn't that I was necessarily worried about music, although I was certainly thinking about it, but the physical logistics for me are at the forefront.
Sure.
And
that's another layer, when we're talking about the musical product. Sometimes the disability doesn't let the musical product be the most important thing. Sometimes not falling down is the most important thing.
Right. But So I think a good solution for that is, just getting to sing sitting down,
Sure.
sitting up as straight as you can. Um, I've noticed that works really well, and is a heck of a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can stand and it feels okay, great. But with singing is such a physical thing, and your body is part of your instrument.
Hmm.
So if you're struggling with balance, if you're struggling with fatigue, it can make it hard to sing. But the whole sitting thing
Uh-huh.
works for me.
Well, and
So
that puts the musical product back in the forefront. So now I can
right,
concentrate on yes.
exactly, yeah,
So that is one, and I have never thought about it because I'm a clarinet player. I sit to play
yeah,
unless I'm playing solo. So
right. So do you stand as a clarinet player when it's a solo? You stand and play.
yes, and I
Okay.
actually had a professor, clarinet professor in college that made me do all of my lessons standing because we play solo standing.
Oh,
And of
okay. All right.
course, that was prior to my injury, so I didn't have any problem with it. But now I
Yeah.
sit to
Yeah.
play because, yeah, I just
Sure.
can't. That, like you
Yeah.
said, it's just too many
Yeah.
things. Even when we play Stars
Yeah.
and Stripes Forever in the
Sure.
community band I play in, they
Yeah.
love to stand up. And there's
Sure.
no way, if I could, I'd have to put my clarinet down and stand up and then pick my clarinet up and start again. So,
Yeah. I
everybody else
understand.
stands up and everybody loves it, and I just sit there and do the best I can.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what I do with singing these days. There are other members in the choir that would sit as well. But, a lot of people stand, and if I'm in the midst of them, I just sit and do my thing.
Yeah,
And
you just do the best
just
you
as
can.
comfortable. Yeah.
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 And that evens us out so that we're starting on a, level as possible playing field. Because I think that you and I
Right.
also share that, the eye tracking, and sometimes we can have trouble, processing.
Right.
I think
Yes.
you talked about having some trouble with that, in writing your dissertation, what you would have skip
Yes.
lines and yeah.
Yeah, I would have spaces between paragraphs. I mean, and not just like one space, but like spaces, or weird margins, or maybe there was a space after a sentence, or maybe there wasn't, or it was like in my head I would know the punctuation, but translating that to the page visually for me was always difficult, especially like bibliographies. That was
Yeah.
always really hard. Um, but because the processing of it, it's not that I didn't understand the rule. It's just, to me, either it would look like it was done, or I just didn't notice. Just like
Mhm.
earlier when I sent you a biography, there were a couple of words that I left out, and I'm like, oh, I meant to say that, but
Yeah.
according to what's in my head, it's there. Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
It does. And I have started when I write using the text to speech function in Microsoft Word to edit because
Yes.
having it read it to me allows me to follow along.
Yes. Yeah, that's a great tool. I remember with my uh, written exams for my doctorate, I used voice activated software, which was a great accommodation to have. I'm very
Yeah.
thankful for that because
And
it
now we have that in every computer and like now Microsoft Word reads it for me. I
yeah,
don't have to have, Dragon anymore. When I started, I used
fantastic.
Dragon, yeah, speech to
Mhm, mhm.
text, and now Word will both speech to text and text to speech.
That is fantastic. That's
So
that
it's
is
gotten a
great.
lot easier because we don't need anything other than what the rest of the students do. We just use it differently.
Exactly. Right. And that's what I mean about having this time where we're in a place where things are more readily accommodated. Technology has advanced enough so that we can have these things like speech to text and other accommodations as needed.
And I notice it in my car because I can't use my right hand, so I have a knob on my
Mhm.
steering wheel that we added.
Right.
But
Yeah.
other than that, I just have the normal lane assist, and I have the
Yeah.
radar controlled cruise control that slows me down if
Okay.
somebody in front of me is going slower. So I
Sure.
don't have
Nice.
very many extras on my car. I just use what's already there.
That is great. That is so great.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, do you have anything else like from your music education that just really stands out to you or suggestions for our music teachers who are listening?
Well, the suggestion that I would make is look for ability of the student. Look for the ability. Sometimes in terms of disability, the first thing, and I do this too, the first thing we do is wonder, okay, what do I need to accommodate? What's the deficiency? But I would also say definitely look at that, but also, and maybe firstly, look at the abilities of your student. They're
Yes.
there, and what abilities do they have? What musical talents do they seem to gravitate towards? And then once you have more baseline of capability, then you can even in a better way, and are more prepared to accommodate the student's disability.
Yes. I like that. Yeah. And I saw a comedian recently. I don't even
Yeah.
remember who or where, but he was talking about autism, and somebody on the front row had a child with autism, and the comedian
Uh-huh.
immediately said, "What's his superpower?" Because the
That's
comedian
awesome.
understands autism. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that
So
is great. I love that.
yes. So, and I mean, really and truthfully, you have one of the most beautiful, heavy, I guess it's Germanic, mezzo soprano voices I've ever heard.
Thank
And
you.
if you have to sit down for me to get that heavy voice, that's what I want you to do.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Well, because not many people, even mezzos that I've heard, tend to have that lighter voice, and yours is just like
Mhm.
argon filled.
it's it's definitely dramatic.
Yeah. Did you have trouble with that as a child? Have you always had that voice?
um, I have well, my voice is always carried. I was the kid in class. My friend could, say something to me in a very low, like whisper type tone, but even if I would try to answer, I would always be the one that you would catch talking in class because I have the super loud voice.
Yeah.
And I think that carried over into my singing just because of how my voice projects. So my singing voice would too. And as I started studying in high school and then continued to study, my voice just kind of developed, and it was always a darker mezzo, tone. As one of my choral directors put it, I had probably been a mezzo since seventh grade, and he was
Yeah.
right. So, you know, always. So, but I
That's,
love it.
yeah, yeah. Well, any last thoughts?
No, this has been really great to be here with you and to get to discuss this. And it's something that I feel very strongly about. So thank you so much for having me on your podcast. Really enjoyed it, and just want to encourage everybody. We're all doing the best that we can, and to find ways to encourage your students and to lift them up, as I know that you are doing and want to continue to do. And thank you for all that you do, Tina, and for
Thank
what you're bringing forward for everyone. And thanks to all the audience members for listening tonight. And let me know if you have any questions.
All
And,
right. Well, thank you.
uh,
This
thank
brings
you.
Yeah, this brings us to the end of our episode. Thanks to Dr. Bonnie von Hoff for joining us to discuss musicianship with cerebral palsy. We hope you feel inspired, equipped, and ready to work with the disabled musicians in your community. If you learned something here, please like and subscribe to our show, and return on October 5th for our next episode featuring Jay Warren from the Baldwin County Life Enrichment Center. Until then, this is Tina Holmes Davis reminding you that small efforts create meaningful results.
This podcast was created by Dr. Tina Holmes Davis. It was recorded by Tina Holmes Davis and edited by Brent McDonald. More Able Than Dis is a product of the Center for Music Education at Georgia College. For more information, check out www.gcsu.edu or follow us on Instagram. Music for this podcast provided by Brent McDonald.
All right, just as we did in our second episode, we're going to end the third episode with a listener question. So last week I talked about musical product versus process and encouraged you to at least some on the musical process and allowing our students with disabilities to be in the process even if they don't contribute to the product. Now, please remember that at no time did I suggest that you should put out a terrible musical product. You still should put out your high quality product, but also allow us to participate with musical process when possible. Now, a question arose because someone had asked about students who we just cannot accommodate. A student comes to us and there's just nothing that we can do. And so I want to answer that by saying that music education is for everyone. Your class might not be. Sorry. And as an illustration, I will tell you a story of a student that I had several years ago who had a cleft palate and cleft lip. The lip was repaired and the palate was reasonably repaired, but was still tender. And this student wanted to play oboe. Now, dear instrumental teachers, you and I know that the oboe has more back pressure than any other wind instrument. And for someone who has cleft palate issues, an oboe may be the absolute worst choice. But my philosophy has always been to let people find out for themselves. So I sat down with this beautiful student and their parents, and I said, I don't think this is a good idea. I'm going to give you 3 weeks to try. We can use a school instrument. I will provide a reed and a book. It will give you 3 weeks to try. And if at the end of the 3 weeks it's okay, we'll keep going. But at the end of the 3 weeks, if it's not okay, if it hurts, which I suspect it will, then we'll have to make another plan. So we got through about 2.5 weeks, and sure enough, it hurt. So I had another meeting with my beautiful student and their parents. And I really strongly recommended percussion as the best option in the band for someone who had this particular physical feature. And the child was adamant against percussion. I don't think they ever gave me the reason that they didn't want to play percussion, but they did not want to play percussion. So I sat for a minute thinking, I cannot turn this student away for a physical disability. That is just not okay. But if they don't want to play percussion, I just couldn't, you can't really guarantee that someone who's had a cleft lip restructured will be able to buzz with the control that we need to play brass instruments. And woodwind instruments may not hurt as badly as the oboe did, but they're likely to still cause pain. So I sat like the Grinch at Christmas, and then finally I went, oh, and so I grabbed the baby by the hand and took them up the hall with their parents trailing behind us to the orchestra room. And that child was a wonderful violin player. And so let me repeat one more time that music education is for everyone, but my class might not be. In this case, I was unable to really serve that child's abilities and wishes in my band room, but I was able to take them to a music classroom where they could participate fully, even with their unique situation. So try not to turn students away. Try to help them find the place where they can be successful. And in some cases, your local music therapist may have options for people who just don't seem to be able to be successful with the musical product that we would like to make. And you might be able to make that referral to the music therapists if they're local to you, or to other available resources like that, rather than take on the full responsibility of trying to teach them in your school. Now, guys, sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes there aren't options, and sometimes we do have to find a way to try to teach them. And we cannot just turn people away because we don't want to deal with it. As much as it is reasonable, try to teach the people in your classroom. But when it does come to that point where it's just not reasonable, feel free to, remind yourself that music is for everybody, but my class might not be. All right, thank you. Have a wonderful time.